So what does this mean in relationship to our traditional concept of community policing?
Okay, I mean, it seems to me that the community policing is about what we do when we define the units we're interested in. The truth is, the community policing was never really about neighborhoods, at least in my view. One of the first community policing projects was at the Vera Institute in 1985 with the New York City Police Department. And I was just finishing my PhD and lucked out and was put on the evaluation of this study of a new program, community policing in New York City. And what I did was I walked the beats with the community police officer. Now, each of them were assigned a beat, which was a fairly large area, 20 square blocks or something like that. Not as large, I guess, as precincts or larger areas. But what happened was when we would walk that beat, we inevitably spent all our time at 2 or 3 blocks. In other words, even in that beat, it wasn't the whole beat. There were 2 or 3 places. And in the end, when we were talking about evaluating the program, I said to the people at Vera, I said, you can't evaluate this program by taking data on the whole neighborhood. Don't interview randomly people who live in these 20 square blocks, because most of the time they weren't there. If you want to look at this program, you need to focus in an evaluation on those specific blocks where the police spent most of their time.
I see. What about when you do focus in on particular areas, what about the kind of the stability? Are the crime rates stable in those units that you're talking about?
Well, this is, it seems to me, a major question if you're interested in policy and not just learning something about concentration. I said before, I think of this as a law of concentration. Study after study, our longitudinal studies, lots of cross-sectional studies, show that most crime is concentrated at a relatively small number of places, or hotspots. But that could be, like some other statistical distributions would say, there's a law of concentration, maybe 4 or 5% of the street segments in the city have 50% of the crime. But maybe each year that changes. Maybe each year a different group of segments account for that distribution. Now, it turns out as well, empirically, that's not what we found. Ron beat me to the punch, but here's a figure again from the study we did in Seattle. And in this study, we not only wanted to get a sense of the concentration, we also wanted to get a sense of what in developmental areas, when we talk about human behavior, of what's called trajectories or developmental patterns. So we adopted a technique from developmental studies of human behavior developed by Dan Nagin, and we tried to answer the question, are there specific types of patterns that would describe crime at street segments in Seattle over a 14 period. And this is what we got out of it. There are 18 patterns here. But I want to focus your attention on the top pattern, I guess in red. That's the really hot spots. That's about 1% of the street segments in Seattle. They account for, I believe, 15 to 20% of the crime. Those hot spots are this is the place, I guess, if we're talking about opportunities, look how much they differ from many of the other trajectories. This is where we'd want to focus our crime prevention. Now, what this says is they're pretty stable over time. I mean, look at their trajectory. It doesn't change very much at all. And if there's anyone here that knows a little bit about developmental patterns of human offending, you know that that's not what you look at. This is not the figure you would see if we were looking at trajectory patterns over a 14-year period for individuals, let's say from the age of 18 to 32. What you'd see is they'd start, or maybe 16 to 30, they'd start relatively lower, and then they go up and up and up in their early 20s, and they start declining usually. By 30, most of these people start aging out of crime. Now, there are some persistent offenders, but that overall trajectory of chronic offenders that you see over and over again, that suggests, for example, if we concentrate on those offenders and we catch them late, we haven't done very much for society. We catch them at age 28, put them in jail for 10 years. Well, if you wouldn't have put them in jail, soon enough they probably would have stopped what they were doing. These crime place trajectories, that's not what we're seeing. It's a tremendous opportunity, because if you didn't do something, it would just continue that way or something close to that. And I think that's another important opportunity of this approach.
Wow. Would you say then that crime is more predictable by location than by offender?
Well, there are two parts to that. I think overall that's the case. If you ask the question, we try to deal with this question a bit. We ask the question: if you're a police department, if you're in Seattle, and you want to focus in on targets, how many targets would I have to focus in on to reach 50% of the crime? So we did that analysis on individuals, and then we did that analysis on street segments, on places. What we found was you had to focus in on 4 times as many offenders to get in 50% of the crime as you did of these street segments or these places or hotspots of crime. Now, there's another thing important. Those hotspots are not moving around the city. Anybody who's a police chief here who works in investigating individual offenders knows that just trying to find them is impossible. These days, when we run a survey and try to capture people a year later, we find that you capture like half of them, or 2/3 sometimes if you're lucky. But the point is you lose a lot of people along the way. So not only is there sort of greater efficiency in focusing in on places at targets, places also stay in the same place, a rather important element of efficiency.
Yeah. Well, do you think that there are other kind of particular opportunities that are presented for law enforcement with this approach? And at the same time, are there particular challenges of this hotspots, place-based policing?
Well, early on in the 1990s, we recognized that these crime concentrations provide an opportunity for law enforcement. Larry Sherman and I did the Minneapolis hotspot study, and it was published in 1995. And that study was very important at the time because until that study, there was those people of my age group and not much younger will remember that in the 1970s and 80s, the view was the police, corrections, you couldn't do much about crime. In other words, there was a sense of sort of nothing worked. We just had to sort of incarcerate offenders, take them out of the world, etc., keep them away, incapacitation. In this study, we really developed it because we became frustrated with this idea that the police couldn't be effective. We thought the police could be effective. We said the problem here is they could be effective if they focused resources a bit differently. And in that study, we focused resources on 55 hotspots of crime that received extra police attention and 55 hotspots that didn't. It was a randomized experiment. Whether you received this extra attention or not was just by chance. And afterwards we saw that crime declined, crime and disorder about 20%, I believe, but significantly during the period we were looking at in the treatment as opposed to the control group. Now that led to a series of 5 other experiments, I think all of them supported, by the way, by the National Institute of Justice, that looked at whether hotspots policing could be effective. All of those 5 studies found a significant effect of the prevention strategies. Some used problem-oriented policing or other strategies to increase effectiveness. Some used regular patrol. So what you've got here then is, as the National Academy of Sciences concluded, this is the best evidence we have the police can be effective. Now, you asked me about sort of what are the problems, or maybe I would phrase it, what do we need to know? Well, it sounds like 5 studies is a lot, and by the way, it's a lot compared to many other crime prevention programs, but 5 studies does not answer all the questions you want to answer. What types of hotspots are appropriate? What types of strategies are appropriate for what types of hotspots? What types of hotspots are less amenable to this type of attention? What type of hotspots are more amenable? How can we be most effective and efficient? There are many, many questions, including, by the way, a very difficult one, which is what is the effect on the communities, the people who live in these places, communities in the small world idea, what is the effect on them? Do they feel that they've been taken over by an occupying force? Do they feel reinforced by police presence? There have been very few studies of this, and this is a really important question if we're going to carry out these sort of strategies at the same time that we increase legitimacy for policing in the community.
Yeah. Well, this question of legitimacy for police is really at the top of the agenda these days. There's a lot of thought and a lot of talk about that. What, in your view, are the implications for legitimacy?
Well, the studies we have so far suggest that the implications are not negative, but I want to be careful because we don't have many studies. There was an early study on a hotspots gun approach that found that citizens were happy with what the police were doing, etc., at least non-offending citizens. I'm doing a study now in Redlands, California, and the results we're getting are that increasing a broken windows type of intense policing 3 hours a week in selected blocks as opposed to others, again a randomized experiment, we're finding it doesn't seem to affect either for the good or for the bad citizen feelings about legitimacy, etc. This is a place, though, where I think more needs to be done. It seems to me that hotspots also provide an opportunity for legitimacy. It's a place you can go to. You can talk to the citizens. Police shouldn't become in like an occupying force on the citizens. They should work on these issues with those citizens. Citizens should understand why this is happening, why it's good for their block, and why in the long run it'll turn out to be something that will make their lives safer and better. To just come in, I think, and some of the studies been done are like this, they show crime prevention benefits, but I think we have to think more about legitimacy, and there's an area, I think, of importance that we should be concentrating on.